Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It's what day is it? It's Thursday, July 17th, 2025. And what I want to talk about is a phenomenon that I see, a helpful phenomenon. Where I think, if you're not, if there's a saying, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Maybe another variant of that would be, if you're not depressed, you're not paying attention, because things look pretty bleak. I mean, we've got genocide going on in Gaza right now, and I'm going to be doing another video about that shortly. There's you have Donald Trump, promising that I'm going to end this war in Ukraine with one phone call. Yeah, right. It's like, who could have believed this? It's like it's the triumph of hope over experience. I mean, Jesus. Anyway, and of course, his whole presidency is like sinking into either absurdity or worse. But what I'm seeing, this is what I want to get to, is the fact that I pay a lot of attention to media. I read a lot. I watch videos and things like that, and that's basically what I'm doing these days. And what I'm seeing is that there's a confluence of opinion that is developing in the United States and across the Western world. In fact, there's been a split between the conservative wing of society and either the liberal wing or the progressive wing. Now, when I say the liberal wing, maybe the way to describe it in such terms would be the Republican Party is the conservatives, and the Democratic Party are the liberals. And the reality is that people like myself have been marginalized from the Democratic Party for decades. And I went to, as I mentioned in earlier videos, when I went to the Democratic National Convention in 1968 to protest the war. I was supporting Eugene McCarthy, who was the senator from Minnesota at the time, and he just got shoved aside, and Robert Kennedy got shot to death, and they foisted Hubert Humphrey on us, who was a lackluster candidate. And so the war went on for another 7 years until the Vietnamese finally kicked the Americans out. So, that was a real, what can I say, learning experience for me. And I went through the ensuing years having similar anti-war views. In 1975, the Vietnam War ended. Then Reagan became president. He was a conservative. He was going to fix things, as if Jimmy Carter, who campaigned on the idea of human rights, but in fact was financing a circuit war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, overthrowing a democratic socialist government in Afghanistan, which had given women actual rights. They didn't have to wear heavy clothing. There was a lot more freedom in Afghanistan. The U.S. wouldn't allow that, and they wanted to bring down the Soviet Union. So they financed Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and people like him, these religious fanatics. And so that was under Jimmy Carter, the Democrat. So it always amazes me that people who continually vote Democratic, they just, election after election, they vote for these people. And what's worse is that, to add insult to injury, is that when you have people like, for example, Jesse Carter in the mid-1980s, who was a left-wing Democrat, and he was shoved aside. And who was Zdeněk Kucinich in the year 2004, and again, I think he ran in 2008. And he was a progressive Democrat. He was anti-corporation and pro-peace, and he was shoved aside. And then, of course, you had Bernie Sanders, and he said a lot of good things. He attracted tremendous amounts of support, and in the end, he buckled. And we're stuck with Obama, who famously said to the bankers, I'm the only thing standing between you and the pitchforks." And this is Yes We Can and Hope and Change. That was the Obama. He was lying through his teeth through you. And of course, George Bush, it was incredible. And George Bush, in the 2000 election, he was talking with Al Gore in a debate. And Al Gore was talking about whether we should be involved in foreign affairs. And George Bush said, "Well, I think we really shouldn't be so involved in foreign affairs, and we should really stick to things at home." This is in 2000, and then 2001. Basically, a year later, 9/11 happens. Dick Cheney's got his filthy fingerprints all over it, and the CIA and Mossad and all these people, because they got into their war. They won another war, yeah. And so that was George Bush. He disappointed, and then he was so disappointing that his popularity fell. And then they said, "Oh, we need Obama, hope and change, and yes we can." So it's like the American people get played back and forth like ping pong balls between these two fake parties that don't give a shit about them. So excuse my language. I should not. As an aside, Donald Trump recently was quoted as using that kind of profanity in talking with Vladimir Putin, and I would say, just as a kind of spiritual practice, as somebody, in Buddhism, there's this idea called right speech, which means that you don't use profanity and you speak in gentle terms that don't offend people. You try to get your point across without being obnoxious. So forgive me for that slip up there, but that's our society is just it's just going down, where people just use profanity all the time. It's not so useful. It's not so conscious. It's a form of violence, actually, which permeates. That's part of the problem. We're a violent society. We use violent language. So here we are in Donald Trump's second term, and he said, "I'm going to end this war with one phone call. I'm going to end this war in one day. I'm going to end this war in 100 days," whatever it was. And now he's saying that he had nice talks with Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin understands who this guy is. I mean, I'm not a particularly, I do not have a KGB or intelligence university education, but I know a shyster when I see one. It's like, so here's Donald Trump, making all these pronouncements, and he says one thing one day, one thing another day. Other commentators have talked about this, and it's just it's everything. Every time he says, he just shows himself to be less and less credible, and the people surrounding him show themselves to be less and less credible. I mean, his whole team, he's got this. He said he was going to clean up the swamp, and he seems like he brought the cesspool with him. I mean, wow. Okay, so anyway, but what's interesting that has happened during this period of time is that there's this kind of a sliver of American society that is both on the what I would consider myself a far left person. That is, I'm more oriented towards socialism. That is the idea that the society, the means of production, should be controlled by the society collectively, so that the profits can be distributed fairly rather than being privatized to super wealthy individuals. So that means like oil and gas and electric utilities, which used to be, many of them used to be publicly owned, but most of them have been privatized, sold off, and the service goes down, the rates go up. So we need to bring back this kind of socialistic aspect. The U.S. Constitution says that the United States should be the one who decides what coins to make, and yet in 1913 they passed it off to a bunch of private banks who created the Federal Reserve Bank, And then lo and behold, there's interest that has to be paid to the Federal Reserve Bank on loans that they make out of thin air, and we're on the hook for it. And so there's an income tax. You don't need an income tax. If you have the major industries in the country that are publicly owned, the profits from those go back towards the society. And if you're not, and if you're a society that's based on benevolence instead of malevolence, you're not engaging in wars all the time. So the society could be run a lot more fairly and more efficiently if we had that kind of system. But be that as it may, people on the left, people I count myself, Ben Norton, Max Blumenthal, Michael Hudson, Richard Wolff. These are all people who are, quite well established. Richard Wolff and Michael Hudson are both well into from my generation, older generation, and they're talking about how to run a society more equitably. Michael Hudson wrote a book in 1970 called Super Imperialism, and he talked about how the U.S. dollar has been used to basically bully countries all over the world. This is from 1970. So the people like him have tremendous credibility, and yet, of course, what happened with him was that he described this phenomenon, and the fascists said, "Hey, this is a great textbook." So this is not what he intended, but that's what happened. They turn everything good into something bad. But anyway, Michael Hudson speaks a lot about our economic problems and how to fix them. And Max Blumenthal is a great investigative journalist. His team, Kit Clarenberg, Wyatt Reed, Aaron Mate, people like that, they do tremendous work. Ben Norton does great work on the Geopolitical Economy Report. And I watch their videos, and I also read their articles. So there's a lot of really good material out there. You do not have to live in ignorance about what our condition is, how we got there, and what we can do about it. But the thing that's really, for me, very hopeful is the fact that aside from the leftist ideas that I have, you have a whole crop of people who come from a military background or an intelligence background. And these are people who were part of the system, and yet their inner sense of dignity, came out, and they realized that they just needed to speak the truth. So maybe the most preeminent person in that category is Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter was a weapons inspector in Iraq, and he also helped dismantle the missile program in the Soviet Union when in the 1980s there was a huge anti-nuclear movement, which I was a part of, and Reagan was desperate to put nuclear weapons right on the border of the Soviet Union, which would have been like no warning for a nuclear attack. And fortunately, the German people rose up, the American people rose up, the British people rose up, and we basically forced the governments to get back into sanity and create this treaty. I think it was 1988, and Scott Ritter was an intelligence. A Marine intelligence officer, and he was sent to the Soviet Union to dismantle their missile program. And then later on, he went to Iraq to dismantle their weapons of mass destruction. And he had, from what I read, he had, mixed feelings about it, but ultimately he concluded that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. There was no need to invade Iraq. There was no need for that war. And the war was cooked up completely cynically by Dick Cheney and people of his ilk. And so that's how we got into Iraq. But at the same time, this is in 2002, you had an organization called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And Ray McGovern was a key person in that. Ray McGovern had been a CIA officer since the 1960s. He speaks fluent Russian. He studied Russian language. He helped negotiate the first arms control treaty. I think it was the ABM treaty. In 1972. He was in Moscow, helping to implement that treaty. And here's this guy who, he understands Russia very thoroughly, and he's not an enemy of Russia. He just wants us to have a good relationship with the largest country in the world. Why is that such a difficult concept for people to get their heads around? So that was Ray McGovern, and he was saying, from what we could tell, there's no weapons of mass destruction. There's no need for war. Later on, in 2016, the whole question of Russiagate came up, where Donald Trump was accused falsely of colluding with Vladimir Putin to throw the election in his favor. And fortunately, Ray McGovern and an associate of his, William Binney, who was a key person in the National Security Agency. He's a very, very smart person. He determined that there was no hack of the Democratic Party servers, that some disgruntled person used a thumb drive to download the emails from the DNC. The person was working for the DNC, and sent those to WikiLeaks. And as a result, the whole narrative about Russia meddling in the elections was disproven. So you have people of that caliber who are they're around, but they're pretty much excluded from power. Then you have somebody like Colonel Doug Macgregor. And Colonel Doug Macgregor was an officer in Iraq. He's seen combat. He's obviously a tough military officer. But somehow he saw the light and concluded that a Cold War turning into a hot war with Russia is a really stupid idea. And he's on constantly talking about it. And he appears regularly on Judge Andrew Napolitano's show. Now, Andrew Napolitano is a guy who used to be on Fox News, and he's got a YouTube channel called Judging Freedom, and it starts off with an American flag and an American eagle, and it's very patriotic, and he's limited government, and so from an economic point of view, I would say I probably don't agree with Andrew Napolitano's economic philosophy. But Andrew Napolitano, to his credit, has not just people like Doug Macgregor or Daniel Davis or who is it? I'm not John. I don't know if John Helmer was on his. He's got other people who are on his show. But he also has people who represent the left, like Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate. So what we're seeing here is a confluence of people on the conscientious conservative right allying with people on the conscious, I call it democratic, I mean the true democratic, the progressive left, who are oppose corporate power and oppose the wars. We're seeing a confluence of these two factions, so to speak, and they're talking with each other, and that is a really good thing. So what I've done in this, following this video, I've wrote a little article about it, kind of an outline form with some of these ideas, and I've included links to a number of these websites, so you can go to those websites and see for yourself, check them out. And YouTube, I'm actually amazed that even though YouTube is pretty clearly censored. There are people who have been kicked off of YouTube for subversive content, for lack of a better term. Um, they YouTube still has a lot of very interesting things. So you can go to YouTube, and then of course, if you don't go to YouTube, you can go to Rumble or Odyssey. Those are two main outlets. They're not. It's not YouTube. It's a separate channel. But you can go to, I think it's rumble.com or odyssey.com, ODYSEE.com, and check them out. So that's basically what I want to talk about today, and I hope you find this useful. What I'm trying to do is, I'm not a military expert. I'm not a trained economist. I'm just somebody who has devoted myself to thinking critically and looking outside of the narrative that we have constantly been fed for our entire lives. Somehow I intuitively understood that there was something seriously wrong with the country, and that we had to find solutions outside of the narrative that we're constantly fed. So that's basically what I have to say. And again, if you can contribute to my Substack, or buy a T-shirt, or send a few bucks to buy me a coffee, or to PayPal, that would be very helpful. So thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.